You know, uh, nobody really loves thinking about long-term care.
Right.
It's not exactly the most fun thing to plan for, but it's something that comes up for all of us eventually.
It does.
Right, like we're all going to get older. And a lot of our listeners have been asking,
Mm.
is long-term care insurance really worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Some people say it's a must-have. Other people say it's a total waste of money.
It's polarizing for sure.
So we're diving into this topic today, and we've got this great story about a woman named Carol
Okay.
who had to face this very question. Before we jump in, I should mention that this story comes from Diversified Insurance Brokers,
Mm.
which is an insurance brokerage. So we want to keep that in mind. There might be some bias there, but we're going to focus on the facts
Right.
of Carol's story and what it tells us about long-term care insurance. So for anyone who's not really sure what we're talking about when we say long-term care, what exactly do we mean?
Well, a lot of people think that long-term care just means nursing homes, but it's actually a much broader term. Oh, okay.
It includes any kind of help you might need with daily activities if you're getting older or if you have a health issue.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be things like bathing, dressing, eating, getting around,
Yeah, makes sense.
managing medications.
Like things that you would normally do for yourself if you were healthy and independent.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And I imagine that's something that a lot of people end up needing at some point,
Oh, absolutely.
not just the very old.
Yeah, it's way more common than people think. And it can happen
Yeah.
at any age, not just when you're like 80 or 90.
Right.
People in their 50s or 60s could need long-term care if they have a stroke or an accident or get diagnosed with a chronic illness.
Wow. That's a good point.
So it's something that everyone should be thinking about.
Okay, so let's talk about Carol. Who is she? What was her situation?
So Carol was in her 70s, and before she needed care, she was really active and independent, like really the kind of person who planned for everything.
Okay.
She was very organized. So years earlier, when she was still healthy,
Yeah.
she decided to get long-term care insurance just in case. And then she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's,
Oh, wow.
which, as you can imagine, was a really tough diagnosis
That's good.
for her and her family.
Yeah.
And the cost started adding up really quickly
I bet. Yeah.
because as her condition progressed, she needed more and more help with
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
everyday tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost of in-home care was like over $6,000 a month,
Wow.
which is a lot of money.
That's a huge amount.
It is. And assisted living, if she needed that,
Yeah.
could have been like close to $90,000 a year.
Oh my gosh. That's like
Yeah.
more than a lot of people make in a year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These kinds of expenses can really just wipe out
Yeah.
someone's savings.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of people aren't prepared for that.
Right. And that's where Carol's foresight really paid off
Uh-huh.
because she purchased that long-term care insurance.
Years earlier. So it covered a good chunk of her in-home care costs, and it would have also helped with the cost of assisted living
Oh,
if she needed that. But,
Yeah.
it's important to remember that long-term care insurance policies
yeah.
vary a lot.
Oh, okay.
They don't all cover the same things.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Exactly.
So the insurance really helped her financially, but was there anything else that it did for her or her family?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's this whole other side to it that people don't always think about. Carol's policy also gave her access to what are called care coordinators.
Oh, interesting.
And these are professionals who help families navigate the whole world of caregiving,
Okay.
which can be so complicated, I bet,
Yeah.
right? Like there's so much to figure out.
Yeah.
So they helped her find qualified caregivers, they helped schedule appointments, and they basically became like a support system for Carol and her family.
Wow. That sounds incredibly helpful.
It was. They were like a lifeline, because it's not just about the financial burden.
Right.
It's also the emotional stress of it all.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a loved one who needs help. It's a lot to handle.
Absolutely.
So having that extra layer of support can make a huge difference.
I can imagine. I remember when my own grandma was getting older, she was so worried about being a burden on our family.
Oh, I bet.
It was like constantly on her mind.
Yeah.
And if she'd had that kind of support,
Right.
like those care coordinators, it would have been such a relief for her
Absolutely.
and for all of us.
It's huge. It's often overlooked.
Yeah.
But that emotional and logistical support is just invaluable.
Totally.
Like, can you imagine facing all of those challenges without that safety net?
Yeah, that would be so tough.
It would. I mean, the financial strain alone can be devastating, not to mention the toll it takes on family relationships.
Right.
And, this is where, for a lot of people, long-term care insurance can really be a lifesaver.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It can. it can really make a difference.
Okay, so back to the big question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it?
Right.
I mean, we just heard how much it helped Carol, but it's a big decision
It is a big decision.
to buy long-term care insurance.
Right. And it's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Okay.
It really depends on your own situation.
Gotcha.
Like, what's your health history like?
Mm-hmm.
What about your family history?
Yeah.
Are you financially prepared to potentially cover, years of care?
Right.
And, thinking back to your grandma, what are your values when it comes to maintaining your independence
Yeah.
as you age?
All good points to consider.
Yeah.
This deep dive was really helpful. It gave us a good look at how long-term care insurance works,
Yeah.
the impact it can have.
Right.
But it also makes you think about, like, the bigger picture.
It does.
Right. If more people are prepared for these costs, does that change how we as a society think about aging and caregiving? That's something I'm going to be thinking about.
It's an important question for sure.
What about you?
Absolutely.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.